You know when you have those nights where you know you slept? Like I slept, okay? It was one of those nights my head hit that pillow and I was out. Woke up not too early, woke up maybe 30, 45 minutes before my alarm clock went off, whatever. I had such a solid night of sleep, it didn't matter. But oh man, I'm just like, I can't wait to crawl back into that bed. 2-day weekends, just regular Saturday, Sunday off is not enough. It's not enough. Because in reality, you need 2 weeks, 2 weeks, yes, ideally. You need 2 days to get stuff done and a day to just genuinely rest and be, a piece of lard. But anyway, let's go ahead on and jump into this book review. Blue Sisters by Coco Mellors, her sophomore novel. Okay. This book, I'm going to preface this. I was very, very underwhelmed with this book. If you've seen my Coco Mellors review, if you see my Cleopatra and Frankenstein review, which is her debut novel that was released a couple of years ago, I had high praise for it. I mean, it's right here. I thought for a debut novel, I was like, this was engaging. It was a page turner for me. Was it a perfect novel? No, I gave it a 4 out of 5. I still think about that book. I enjoyed Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I am so underwhelmed with this book. And I see so much praise for it, and I'm thinking, but I know I'm not the only one, because when I don't look up the negative reviews until I finish reading the book, because I don't want to be influenced. But I'm like, I'm not the only one. And I have a bookish friend Charisse, who also read this book, and she was like underwhelmed. She's like, yeah, me too, girl. So you're not crazy. I'm going to get into what I found to be disappointing with this novel at the very end, because this was a top release of the year. Like, this is all over the place. The reviews are wild, as in like, it's so great, it's so great, it's so great. It was my top read of the year. And I'm thinking, can't relate. So this is for all you guys out there who read this book and this just wasn't for you. We can all band together in the comments, and we're not crazy, We're not crazy. It's okay if you liked it. If you like it, I love it. But always remember, and I will say this time and time again, just because no two people read the same book and dissent is okay. Like, I wonder if I should do, this is a ramble, maybe not. I have considered for at least a year now doing a video about why I think negative book reviews are important. Let me know if you would like that video, because I've been thinking about doing it. But let's jump in, because just because I didn't like it, someone else will enjoy this book. Not may, they will enjoy this book. Other people have enjoyed this book. And so I'm just going to focus on the themes that I picked out. And if any of this piques your fancy, give it a try, because just because I don't like it, you may like it. Anyway, and then I'm going to get into why this was just not my cup of tea, and why I may actually not pick up another Coco Mellors novel. So she hoped and she hoped and she hoped. Deep. All right. I'm going to try not to be snarky, but I'm going to try to save the snark for the end. All right, let's just dive in. So this is Coco Mellors' sophomore novel, and the Blue Sisters, that's their last name, Avery, Bonnie, and Lucky, have lost their sister, Nikki, a year prior to the start of where this narrative starts. And it was an unexpected death. And Mellors uses each sister to highlight the impacts of grief and addiction, to highlight the impacts of grief and addiction. Yes, I was like, was my grammar there a little weird? Maybe. As well as the effect that familial relationships have on all of us. And so, obviously, because we're dealing with a death here, the death of Nikki, the main theme of this novel is grief, obviously. And the crux of this novel focuses on how each sister is dealing with, processing with the loss of Nikki 1 year later. The urge to speak to her sister and to tell her what life was like without her was constant. Calling her felt like being an amputee who, believing she was she still has legs, keeps trying to stand. But the grief, she didn't know how to handle the grief. It was the surprise that hurt the most. She had lived her entire adult life minimizing risk to avoid being caught off guard by pain, yet she had not protected herself from this. And I wait for the feeling to end because every other feeling has ended, no matter how intense, no matter how hard, but this won't. There's no end to the missing. This was life. There was life before and there's life now. I will give this story its props. I will give credit where credit is due. There are quotes in this book. I pulled out 3 that I liked about grief in particular that just hit the nail on the head. You can grieve. There are 2 types of grief, I think, when it comes to 2.5, we'll get there. When it comes to people in our lives, you can grieve a person who is dead. Okay. And we have a person here who has died. There's a grief knowing that that person is never coming back. But that grief, does it ever really go away? And you're missing somebody who never will come back. Then there is the grief of missing and grieving someone who is still alive. And these quotes stand. That is why grief is such a difficult emotion to process. Grief is heavy. And I heard a quote, I can't remember who it was a few months ago now, about how grief will literally kill a person. Like heartbreak is real and like death by heartbreak is real. You can die of a broken heart. And there's the grief of missing someone who's still alive, whether that be just through loss of communication or people have gone their own separate paths, or you're grieving a relationship, whether that be familial or platonic or romantic, because it for whatever reason it ended a certain way, or maybe there are people, and I see children, even I don't want to say children, but people who are even adults who grieve in particular familial relationships that were never what they should have been. You know what I mean? Like you can grieve a relationship for what it never was, right? If you grew up in an abusive home and you're grieving because your family should really be the first line of protection between you and the world. And then when you don't get that, you grieve what never was. Right. And so, she did hit the nail. I'm rambling, but that's why people also stay on my channel. You can grieve because you can heal from grief and still miss somebody heavily. Grief is so strange. And I think the reason why I'm like mumbling or like stuttering all over the place or I'm rambling all over the place is because 2024 for me, a lot of grief. So there's that. So Coco Mellors hits the nail over the head. The Blue Sisters were also raised in a household where their father is a bit of a loose cannon because he is an alcoholic. I said that weird, excuse me. And so their mother is quite a withdrawn character. She's a withdrawn woman because she's also living in this house with this destructive, abusive father when he gets in his moods because of the alcohol. And so the sisters rely on their relationships with each other to block out this home that is subject to chaos. And again, I think that Mellors does this very well. She just has Mellors can have these one-liners, man. And you're like, yeah, I mean, she gets it. Like she gets at the core of certain things very well, I think, without a lot of fluff. And so she does also use this framework of this unstable home life that they grew up in. And this trickles into it like hoses into their adult lives, and this past trauma leaks out for each sister in various ways. Lucky had this theory that having a bad dad was like growing up in a place with a long, rough winter. It hardens you. It also prepares you for reality, which is that summer is a season, not a lifestyle. He was the only man in the house, but he also was the house. They lived inside his moods. If you've ever been around a person It could be at a work environment. It could be in your home where you've ever had to walk around eggshells around a person. Enough said, okay? Like, I think most people know what it's like to live inside other people's moods. Like, you do everything that you can to not trigger them, and it's still not enough because you're trying to keep your own peace, but it's still not enough. We've all been there, right? Okay. So this does transition nicely into the other major theme, and the major theme that I actually think that Coco Mellors talks about, because it's addiction. She talks about addiction in Cleopatra and Frankenstein. Addiction is a massive theme here. And addiction will be the major theme of her third novel. So Mellors, on her social media and in interviews, excuse me, I'm burping. Is it an Alana video if I'm not burping? No. She's very upfront that the Mellors is sober. And so this is evident by how she writes about addiction in her narratives. You can tell that she is pulling from personal experience. So each sister is actually addicted to something in their own way. For some of them, it's substances. One is a workaholic. One is a former professional athlete. And so she uses her body and exercise. She's a boxer. Bonnie actually is a boxer, who's my favorite sister actually, to latch on to that and just throw everything into her sport. Lucky is a model and is addicted to, that girl is addicted to everything. Okay. And Avery's the oldest, and she had her run-in with substances, and that's still kind of has an impact on her life again, even though, from the outside looking in, her life looks the most perfect. Weren't all addicts looking for relief from some invisible pain? Weren't all people? I think they're trying to fall in love with life again. That's what I see in the club every night. All the sex and booze and coke. It's not really about that stuff. It's people who have fallen out of love with life, trying to get back to how they used to feel, Oh, I thought that was the last thing I had to discuss regarding themes. No, of course, obviously, this book is about sisterhood as well. And in the prologue, Mellors opens up with this paragraph about sisterhood, and this is just one quote from it. I'm not even going to dive deeply into that. I'm just going to, read this quote and dive into my overall thoughts on this novel. True sisterhood, the kind where you grew fingernails in the same womb, were pushed screaming through identical birth canals, is not the same as friendship. You don't get to choose each other, and there's no furtive period of getting to know the other. You're part of each other right from the start. I actually disagreed with that whole paragraph, to be honest. Nothing against her. She was just saying how, it's not the same. It really is deeper than certain friendships. And I'm like, debatable. They say that blood is thicker than water, but is it? Or blood is the closest bond. Is it? Is it? Is it? Debatable. That's just me being a pragmatist. So, what was it about this novel, after really enjoying Cleopatra and Frankenstein, that fell incredibly flat for me? I think this book needed tighter editing. Some of that for stylistic reasons. There are some closing sentences in certain chapters that are just so cliche, and it just hits the nail over the head too much. And there were certain sentences at the end of this paragraph, this one, concluding sentences, and I'm like, you just said that. It's cliche. It comes across as elementary, and I'm like, why? I'm going to get into editors in a minute. Mellors tells way too much. She does not show. And if you, authors, Authors, editors, catch this. Your reader is not dumb. We all know that, as cliche as I'm talking about cliches go, showing is always better than telling. Trust your reader. If you just showed it, you don't need to blatantly state what you just showed. We got it the first time. We connected the dots. And this is an issue that I see more and more in contemporary literature, to the point where I'm like, do they think that we're dumb? The next video that I'm recording after this is the same thing. I'm like, you just said it 20 times. Editors, stop. There is a book that I'm reading now. It's called Without You Here. I cannot for the life of me, forgive me. I'll do a review on it. Remember the author off the top of my head, because I'm not even 100 pages in. This is not a book that has any marketing, really. It was sent to me. And I picked it because the theme personally resonated with me, even though it's a hard topic. But this author, I even highlighted a paragraph, showed and stepped back. And it was so brilliantly done. But this author doesn't have the marketing. She doesn't have the news articles about her. That book will never be a bestseller, probably. But it's better written than this. In some cases, it's better written than Sally Rooney. A lot of these books have fantastic marketing. And so when I read lesser known novels and I see that the writing is immaculate, it irritates my soul, because this needs tighter editing. And I actually think the book is too long, and it's not a long book. Okay, I'm getting kind of irritated. I also didn't feel much chemistry between these sisters. They felt like caricatures. Yes, each of the sisters is very different. And, I am one of 3. And anybody who has siblings, we know this. Just because you're siblings doesn't mean you're alike. There are obviously going to be similarities there because you grew up in the same house. There's personality traits that I think are just genetic. But I'll use me and my sister, for example. I do have a sister. If we were to stand side by side, there is no denying this relation, okay? And we have a lot of similarities, but we also have major differences in our personalities. And my mom was just like, that's just, as a parent, she's like, you look at your kids and you're like, these are very different people. And not in a bad way, just very, very different people. And so, but in this, somehow how these sisters came across, they felt like caricatures. I was feeling a lack of chemistry just across the board with these characters. I didn't feel even the mother in particular, the father, they're not supposed to be in the forefront, but they just feel like caricatures. And I said this about Cleopatra and Frankenstein, but in the setting of Cleopatra and Frankenstein in the middle of New York City, those caricatures make sense. Just hop on a New York subway, a New York train. It makes sense. Even though these characters, there is a portion of this book that does take place predominantly in New York City. These sisters were raised in New York City. But in here, we're talking about the bond of these sisters and how Nikki's death had a negative impact in some cases on this bond. And these sisters are trying to reconnect with that bond. Something just didn't flow. And there was just something about these characters that don't feel cohesive to me. All of it. Even in these sisters have other relationships, romantic relationships, platonic relationships. Something just didn't feel cohesive amongst the characters. I did have a little praise here. I said this earlier, my favorite character was Bonnie, the boxer, because it's not every day that you get a female boxer in a story. And so I thought that was cool. And I think that Bonnie's sections when she's in the rink or when she is in the rink. I think that Bonnie's sections when she is boxing and she's training to box or she's in a fight are the best written scenes. There's a flow to them. There's a rhythm to them. And you can see in those sections that Mellors is a very talented writer. And actually, I think this is a cool fact. Mellors took boxing lessons and is still taking boxing lessons because of this character. And you can tell because it came out in the writing that she knew what she was talking about. Yeah, she's an amateur. She's just taking it for kicks and giggles, but props, that's not easy. And you can tell. And so for me, those sections were really well done. This novel for me didn't do anything groundbreaking, and that's fine. It is very readable. I flew through it. It's a quick read. Even though I think that she wrote about grief well, she has good one-liners, overall, it wasn't a book where I was like, ooh, this is the book about grief. That's like, yeah, there is still something, dare I say, that is a bit generic. And also with some of the literary devices that she uses, certain metaphors, they were literally verbatim from Cleopatra and Frankenstein. And I quote, conversation popped against the skin. She wrote... Let me preface this. All authors have a style. Dostoevsky has a style. Jane Austen, are you kidding? You know what you're getting with the Jane Austen novel, right? You know what you're getting with the Brontes. You know what you're getting with a Tolstoy. You know what you're getting with a Nabokov, a Steinbeck, a Hemingway. But each of their novels still have their own feel. Like, none of Jane Austen's novels, they're all here, blend together for me, even though they're all very distinctly Jane Austen. All of the Dostoevsky novels I've read thus far don't do this for me. They're all very distinct, okay? And here, I was just kind of disappointed in the fact that I was like, you copied that metaphor from Cleopatra and Frankenstein. This way that you wrote this to make the narrative seem rushed, like it's growing and somebody's brain is just rushing 1,000 miles a minute. You did the same thing. And I was disappointed. It didn't feel fresh. It felt pasted. And sure, it just it's the same thing. The characters are different. What's the saying? Same story, different cover. There's overall, the novel just doesn't stick out to me in any way. Also, I wanted to mention that there are some sex scenes in this novel that, in my opinion, the writing of it was cringy. They were explicit for no reason other than to be explicit. And they didn't, what was surrounding it, I was like, did she need to go into that kind of detail? Is she the only author going into detail? No. But somehow it did, again, cohesion. There was something that didn't feel cohesive about it. And it just would stick out. Here's this graphic sex scene going on about the narrative. It just was weird, and it needed more massaging. It just was something about it was just those scenes seemed abrupt to me, and I thought I was crazy. And then I saw another review on Goodreads after I read this book who said the same thing. They were just unnecessary. And I'm no prude. It wasn't even about that. It was the way that they were written. I was just like, it cheapened it, actually. The way that these scenes were described felt cheap. Yeah, this just overall fell flat for me. I devoured it when I read it. This was actually the book I took with me when I went to California. So I devoured and finished the book then and started another one while I was there. And I just wasn't floored. It was boring for me. I think it needed a lot more editing, a lot more massaging. And for a sophomore novel, I'm expecting things to be tighter. And I just didn't get that. And again, I don't mind an author repeating themes. Again, Jane Austen is an excellent example. It's domestic fiction in Regency England and these women trying to get married. But each novel is still distinctly Jane Austen, but distinctly this different. You know what I mean? And this just felt somehow just boring and just generic. And again, we got so much addiction in Cleopatra and Frankenstein. We get it here. And even how these characters deal with their addiction, especially substance abuse, was very much the same. And her third novel is going to be about addiction. And I'm thinking, I think I'm done. Like, I'm going to say this because you guys know I'm blunt. And this is why I don't get on with Sally Rooney. One, I just don't think she's a good writer. I just don't. I do think she's excellent marketing, which is ironic to me considering how much she complains about. I said complain. Yeah, to how much she like is capitalism, this, that, and the third, but she benefits like from it for like crazy and then acts like she's just above it. Girl, bye. Excellent marketing. And Sally Rooney has said she gonna keep writing the same stories because that's what she wants to do. She writes the same stuff over and over again, same book, different cover. She said it in an interview. Coco Mellors to me is a bit the same at this point. It's the same stuff, slightly different characters, slightly different setting, but it's the same themes. Emily Henry is the same way. I'm actually, after 2 Emily Henry books, I'm actually done. I'm getting rid of all of my Emily Henrys. I read one, I read them all. They're one-trick ponies. No, don't get me wrong. If that's what you run to write over and over and over again. But I will say this, when I latch onto an author, and this is just my personal taste, some people want to read certain things the same way over and over again because that's a comfort read for them when it comes to one author. I'm not that way. I know what I like, and I want to, when I latch onto an author, I want to see their work change, and I want to see them experiment and challenge, and I just am not going to get that with Coco Mellors, and that's fine. So I don't think moving forward she's going to be for me. I personally do not want to read one-trick ponies. That's just my take. And so I'm just disappointed. I found it boring and underwhelming, and it needed more massaging. I said what I said. I gave this book a 2.75. I do think that it had its moments of really good writing, but overall, I think it needed more massaging. And I don't want to keep reading the same things over and over and over again. And personally, for me, if I'm going to read about grief, there are other authors who are doing it better for me. Esther Kinsky's Grove. Oh my gosh. You want a book about grief? It is so atmospheric at the same time. There are others, but Esther Kinsky's Grove. Maybe because I'm reading Esther Kinsky's River right now, and that woman, whew, and that's a translated work. Let me tell you about that. I can't wait to review that book. Esther Kinsky's Grove and River were translated by 2 different people, but somehow you can't even tell. I love Fitzcarraldo editions. They put a lot of work into what they produce. Anyway, what they publish. Anyway, I was just underwhelmed. Anybody else, have you read a recently hyped book recently and you just were like, I don't get the hype. I'll just be the odd man out. Please let me know. Have you read this book? Did you feel do you wildly disagree or do you agree? Please leave your comments below. Also, please feel free to like and subscribe and follow me on Instagram where I get into more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book reviews there first, and I post the occasional goofy reel in the Instagram stories. And with that, I will see you in the next one. Bye. Oh, before I go, well, I already said it. I actually forgot I read this book until it was time to review it. Isn't that crazy?